because I don't have my glasses on.
Yeah.
Hello. Welcome to Progressive Soup. My name is David Stevenson. Tonight we have a return visit from Nina Mohadjer, who is our analyst of many backgrounds. Born in Iran, did some growing up there, went with her parents to Germany.
Yes.
And ended up somehow or other, and you could fill us in on that if you'd like, ended up in Ridgefield.
Exactly. Yeah.
How did you become a Ridgefieldian? We haven't gotten to that part of the story yet.
First of all, thank you so much for having me again, David. And I would like to apologize ahead of time for my very smoky voice. I have seasonal allergies. However, I really wanted to join you here tonight. So instead of canceling...
I thought I had Lauren Bacall on.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. Going to your question, how I ended up in Ridgefield. When I had finished my law school in Germany, my former husband, he wanted to come back to the U.S., and he knew exactly which place was good for me. So me, as a city girl, I imagined myself somewhere in New York City or on a small scale in Stamford.
Yeah.
No matter what, it had to be a city for my opinion, for my taste.
Yeah.
And he tricked me in a way, because during the Indian summer, he drove me right through Route 33.
Okay, yep.
And this was it for me. I fell in love with the trees, with the streets, with this whole ambiance of this whole image, the scenery, this idyllic vision of Ridgefield.
And so many movies, speaking of Lauren Bacall, but a lot of movies during the 30s and the 40s were made in Connecticut in little towns like Darien at the time and Ridgefield.
Exactly, and it still, after living there for the past 16 years, it did not lose any bit of its charm for me. It still captures me. And funny thing is, 16 years ago when we were driving through that street, I said to him, one day I will own a house on this street. And guess what? It took 16 years, a divorce, and I still stayed in Ridgefield. I didn't go back to Europe as I had intended to do, and I ended up buying that house on Route 33. So it's all a circle.
And Ridgefield is a very joyous, very lovely little town. It's where Greenwich was when I was growing up 30, 40 years ago. It's where Westport used to be 20 years ago, and Ridgefield seems to have held on to that sense of smallness and quaintness that other places have lost.
Yes, and at the same time, within the past 16 years, I've seen a development of seeing Ridgefield more diverse. When I moved into the town, we did have Schlumberger and Boehringer Ingelheim,
yes.
And many people from GE or IBM commuting from Ridgefield to other areas, to their workplace. However, when I said I'm from Germany, my background is Persian, a lot of people gave me puzzled looks, which I now do not receive. Maybe because they got used to me as being a cultural chameleon in a way. Maybe I opened up.
Chameleon's exactly the accurate word. Multi-talented is more, and multicultural background rather than a chameleon. Chameleons change for reasons that I don't think we see in a very positive light. But certainly what you've done is something very different than that.
Well, for me, a chameleon is always, as I mentioned once before, I tried to, even though unfortunately I have negative or weaknesses as well, which I never like to admit, I have...
What could those be?
Well, we're not going to get into that.
Okay.
I try to take from every culture I've been, or from every country actually I've been, the positive aspects, the strengths of that culture, and adapt them. So it doesn't matter where I go, I always try to see something positive. And this is something I learned within the years. At the beginning when I lived in Ridgefield, of course I was very happy at the first couple of weeks, until I realized this is it. This is going to be my life. And then the unhappiness came. This was the flipped coin. Missing home, meaning I had left an associate job, I had left my parents, I had left my friends, my family, and all of a sudden getting an awakening. Okay, I am different, so what am I going to do with that? And I think those couple of years, I would say it was approximately 5-6 years, before I learned really to discover those strengths about myself, before I learned, okay, this is it. It doesn't matter where I live in this world. It matters who I live with and how I, it sounds maybe a little bit on the surface, but I'll get deeper into it, how I decorate my place, how I make my four walls to my home. So it doesn't matter whether I'm in China, and now I reached the point you could put me in China and I'd be as happy as I am here. Sure enough, I would get upset about the grocer down the street selling something more expensive than the one half an hour across the town. But this would be everywhere. So I can see the strength and weaknesses everywhere. So that's the positiveness. When I say chameleon, that's what I mean, not the negative aspect.
You've noted that that everywhere you've gone, you have seen those common grounds, those common binding things that bind all of us together, and it's pretty marvelous to get a sense of that from you.
Yes, I've seen that, and it took a long development, and this is something I'm trying to teach my children right now, being both teenage girls. Of course, they think Ridgefield is the most boring place in this universe.
Every kid in Ridgefield feels that way.
Unless they're very little, because there are a lot of programs for small children, which can go back probably to why we have 6 elementary schools and only 1 high school. And then you notice either older people or people who want to raise their small children really live in Ridgefield. Those people in this age range of, I would say, 14 to 30-ish, they somehow are very thin. It's like a bottleneck, really. And then going back into another bottle, of course. But you know what I mean? It's a very narrow target market in
the
town.
demographics are very, they're not smooth at all.
Exactly. And so my children are, of course, they constantly say, let's move, let's move. We have to go somewhere where there is a little bit excitement. And I try to explain to them, no matter where you live, you could live Upper East Side, New York City. What kind of place can you find more exciting than there? Or somewhere in Beverly Hills. Guess what? When you're 14, 15, 16, you're still going to get bored there. Because there are so many times you can see Tom Cruise walking over the street. The first time you'd get excited, as probably someone from the city coming to Ridgefield and seeing a deer, they get excited. The second time you see Tom Cruise, the third time you see him, it's going to be the same as you see a deer now. Not to mention that
town mouse and country mouse. The town mouse always sees the country as being exciting. You have this vision of what the other person's situation is and how exciting that is, and likewise in reverse. But then when you see it, I think people tend to gravitate back toward what they know and what they're used to.
Exactly. And I'm trying to teach them, no matter where you live, it's you who has to be the base of that circle. I might have mentioned once to you that as a Sufi I believe a lot in circles, that everything which starts at one point gets back to the point. It might have come through Paulo Coelho's book, The Alchemist.
I think that fit in with our discussion about Buddha, if you'll recall our discussion.
Yes,
if anybody will discuss, and this has been our most watched show of any so far that we've done out of 120, of which about 60 of them are on YouTube. But we talked about the Buddha, and again, everything coming full circle. What you do, what you put out, eventually comes back to you.
Exactly. And a lot of times you have certain assets, but you do not have the knowledge or, when I use the word intelligence, I don't mean it necessarily as intelligent being someone who is versus somebody who is dumb, but for those assets you're not mature enough to discover them. So you have to go through certain experiences in order to acknowledge those assets you have, in order to understand what you really have in your hands is something which is of value. Again, bringing an example of my own, my father was always, or is still to this day, very strict with languages with me and my sister, or generally. he always brought that sample for me that no matter how many languages you speak, you're adding people to your own personality. You're adding people to your own existence because you are able to understand that country's culture much better. So, of course, when my friends were going out having fun and I was sitting on a Friday evening or on a Saturday evening in my room studying French grammar, which is one of the toughest grammars, I would not appreciate it.
More exceptions to the
yes,
irregular verbs.
Exactly, and it's
French.
Still to this day it just makes me go insane when I see those exceptions. Point is, when I was sitting there and really working on it, in order to polish that aptitude I had and make it an asset, of course I didn't like it. I was, how old, 12, 13, 14, typical teenager. I wanted to go out and have fun and not study for a stupid French exam. But now I have to really admit, I have a law degree, I have a business degree. There are so many lawyers who are much better than I am, probably. There are so many business people who are better than I am. But I got every job because of my language abilities, because this is what makes me very unique. So I'm trying to explain it to my children as well. When you have a certain asset, you're not going to appreciate it now. You will appreciate it later on, at a point in your life where you never believe you might actually use that asset.
And that's the toughest part of learning anything going through life is thinking forward and realizing that there's some practical usage and that's what makes a great teacher, is a teacher that can explain to the students and help the students understand what they're learning this for, what practical applications. And when language, as you say, language is marvelous in terms of practical applications, because you're not just speaking another language, but you're thinking in a whole nother culture. And it broadens it gives you more of a rainbow of what, and of course there are how many major languages are there on planet Earth?
I think 156-ish.
Yeah.
Plus, minus.
And I guess English
10.
is probably the most widely spoken, but maybe not. So. Maybe Mandarin.
I believe it's Mandarin, because if you go by the people who speak it, yes. If you go by the countries, of course it would be English and Spanish right behind it, I would assume. But it's with everything, as you mentioned, it's with everything though, David. It's not only with languages. My older daughter, she literally hates mathematics. And I said to her, and she always asked me...
Which, by the way, is a language.
Yeah, go and tell that to a 16-year-old. And she always asked me, when am I going to use this? When am I going to calculate the area of a circle? When am I going to use sinus and cosinus? And I tried to explain to her that I had chemistry in school as one of my main subjects.
Yeah.
And I really suffered with it. Even though I had elected it myself, I really did not like it at the end. Long story made short, where do I work now after all the circles going and going? In the pharmaceutical law. Basically, when I get clinical studies, I'm able to actually read those and understand what they're saying.
Because of your chemistry background.
Exactly. And did I think as a 17-year-old I will ever use chemistry? No. I wanted to go to law school, to business school. I don't want to have anything to do with chemistry. So I said to her, you know what, sweetie? You either become a lawyer, so you don't have to use your math, or you end up going into a field where you end up using your math. For her, being a lawyer is equal to being boring. So that was more.
Well, mathematics, of course, being just another language, basically a language of very odd symbols, almost like hieroglyphics in some of the geometry and algebra and these other things. Maybe part of the reason why you learn something is that someday you'll be able to pass it on to somebody else. That you'll be able to help somebody else understand it. The same way that in millennia past, people pass down knowledge.
That is true. That is absolutely possible.
And it's nothing like learning something from another human being. Out of a book is great, but to learn from somebody, that's far better to learn from another human being.
Which makes absolutely sense, because we say when you read something, you understand or you really learn a certain percentage, and when you hear something, you understand that percentage plus an additional percentage, and when you really practice it, when you really dig into an issue yourself, this is the time where you really achieve that comprehension for that issue, which is absolutely true. I mean, this is probably the reason why we have also the Socratic method of teaching, which is slowly coming in Europe, actually. In my days, we didn't have that.
Tell me about the Socratic method of teaching.
This was completely new to me when I started studying here, because when I studied in Germany, in law school, I might have mentioned it to you, we had 13 years, which has now changed, and then we were able to directly go and apply to medical school, law school, or any school we wanted.
So you've gone through the preliminaries of a college education at that point.
So basically our grade 12 and 13 is equivalent to the first 2 college years you have here. And over there, when you go to law school, you have an auditorium of between 200 and 500, sometimes in bigger cities, thousands of people sitting, and listening to the same professor who stands in the front and reads from his lectures, mostly his books, for 2.5 hours. And you sit there, try to listen. Of course, in our days, we didn't have text messaging, we didn't have cell phones yet, otherwise it would have been texting.
No distractions.
Well, we tried to listen as much as possible, but we wrote notes to each other, so anything to not to listen. Or
with me, it was the paper airplane.
Exactly, and we wouldn't listen at all, or we would leave the auditorium if possible. We had one professor who would follow us, actually, and always ask us for the reason we would leave. We thought we could make up that time much better going to the library, which happened rarely. We ended up going into a cafe and having a good time, of course. I just hope my children
and talked about things that were more relevant to us than what was going on in the assembly hall with the professor.
Yes, of course. And I'm one of those moms who actually tells the true stories to her children. So even in case my children watch this show, they're not going to think, really, she told me she would be studying.
See, kids.
So we would try to listen, as mentioned, and then we had smaller study groups.
Study groups, yeah.
Where first-hand experience was given to us on cases. However, it was not until later on, we have 2 bar exams there. And again, this is just for the German law school. Medical school and everything is, engineering school is different. After the first bar exam and the practices we had, I really learned how to approach a legal case in Germany. Here, it was just when I started going to business school here, it was 2002, and the first class. Now imagine, I was over 30, I had a family already, going for the first time back to school in a foreign, for me, country, being here in the U.S., studying in a different language than the one I was used to, being German. The professor asking us to introduce ourselves in a small group, where I thought, oh my God, what is happening to me? Why do I have to speak up in front of a group I do not
didn't feel like an outsider there, too, like as you told us you did when,
of course I did.
When going from Iran to Germany and with that beautiful raven hair sticking out like a sore thumb with all the blonde-haired, blue-eyed Germans.
Yes, the difference was that back then, when I really wanted to open up that ground and sink in, I was 10 years old. Here I was over 30, let's say 30 plus. I'm not going to say how old.
Around 30.
Yes. And I really felt awful at that time. But you have much more life experience, so automatically you speak up. You hear your own voice speaking in a different language in front of a group. Of course, it's shaking a little bit.
Did you think back to previous experiences like that? Did they?
I felt exactly like the day I felt in that church in Germany. Again, feeling I'm different. All of these people went to college here, they went to high school here. This is their first language. It's not mine. what am I actually doing? The whole time until my turn came up, I was thinking, what am I actually doing? I should really walk out of this class. But again, the difference is that...
And you stayed, obviously.
Of course I stayed. As a grown-up, I learned to face my fear. And as Eleanor Roosevelt said, you have to face your fear. And I'm not quoting her exactly with her words, but when you look at your fears, you are able to overcome them. So nobody can make you feel inferior unless you give them a reason. So I felt, okay, nobody can make me feel like an outsider unless I feel like an outsider myself, which I automatically tried to overcome by appearing very self-confident on the outside and speaking up, staying in that class. And the biggest achievement for my professor out of that class, with whom I'm still in touch, he said to me, you really taught me from all my teaching experience the best sample of what a multicultural person is able to reach and achieve. So, going back to your Socratic method, where we actually ended up here.
Heard about Socrates. I know about the Greeks and Socrates and Plato and the rest of those gentlemen.
Yes, and I feel it brings, if you're not familiar with that method, of course, it brings some fear to you. As Napoleon Bonaparte was asked once, he was awoken in the middle of the night, and they said to him, get up, get up. And he said, what's happening? I thought I'm somewhere in an exam and being asked questions. And they said, no, this and this country, they just attacked us. He said, oh, don't worry, we're going to send an army. So which shows you that if you're all of a sudden picked out of a group and are asked question, you feel exactly like Napoleon felt. I'm on the spotlight. So even if somebody walks in here now and asks you, David, give me this and this sample, this and this, you would stop back for a second and say, what is happening? So if you're not used to this method, it's much more difficult to get to that level of confidence. What I like about it is that Socrates was convinced that while engaging his student in the learning process and not having the learning process here and having the student there, being the observant and being the listener only, that student, by being engaged in this whole process, is going to learn much more by applying the freshly achieved knowledge and checking yourself. So it becomes automatically a check and balance. So when I give you a sample, a mathematical equation, if you're not able to apply it immediately on a sample, it becomes much more difficult for you to remember that rule in half an hour, in an hour.
You know, the one that I can never figure out, you're speaking of mathematical examples.
Don't ask me math questions now.
This one, pi r squared.
Yes.
Everybody knows they're round.
Well, you want to...
Pies. Yeah.
Oh, David, now you're playing with languages while using math. Yeah, well...
Well, math's a language.
Exactly. But generally, I mean, if you apply things, you remember. And it depends a lot on the teacher, of course, as well. There are certain, even in law school and business school we had that, there are certain faculty members who, I don't know whether they don't have that ability or that fun for teaching. I had a very good professor at business school who taught me actually my negotiation skills. He was able to not only teach me negotiation, the skills, but he was able to polish my own skills as well, which I never knew I had. So he basically opened, as a good teacher should, he's not going to give you the knowledge and put it in your lap. A good teacher should open up those doors of your own knowledge, because everybody is there with some sort of knowledge. You're a living creature. You're observing things. You're listening. You see things. You're there. So automatically you have a certain amount of knowledge about things. So a good teacher should open up those doors for you. So anybody telling me, oh, I'm stupid in this genre, or I'm stupid in this subject. I don't believe it. You do have the knowledge. You might not have it as your strength. It might not ever become your biggest asset, but you do have a knowledge, and you probably didn't have a good teacher to polish this up for you.
And with the overlapping of one subject to another, to another, to another, to another, you always have a little, you can always relate something else you've learned.
Absolutely.
To what you are learning.
Absolutely. So this to the Socratic method, which I think is really good.
So it's a more active, more integrative kind of
yes.
learning experience.
Yes.
Yeah, I sort of know what it is, but you know, being slightly north of 50, I have to have things explained to me again once in a while.
You probably had the lecturer standing in front of the classroom teaching as well, or?
Well, when I taught, I was more of an interactive teacher. I more what I student taught, and when I taught as a substitute teacher along the way occasionally, I would be in a classroom in a subject matter that I really wasn't that clear on myself personally, but I knew that if I could ask the students, throw the hot potato in their lap and let them explain what they're learning to me, it'd be a learning experience for them and a reinforcing experience for learning experience for me and a reinforcing experience for them. And I found it to be very a good way to make the entire group, students and teacher, better for it.
I absolutely agree with you, because even as grown-ups, when we're in the workforce, if I have an issue, I do not usually solve it on my own. So you have a team of people, and everybody looks at a cube from a different angle.
Yep.
So even as a teacher, when you studied that genre, that subject, your students are most likely younger than you are in normal school, not grad school or
more
college.
Often than not, certainly.
And they are able to look from their own experience at a certain subject, and you might actually learn from them as well. So it's not only a one-way street. Teaching and learning should be a two-way street. It shouldn't be a one-sided experience.
Oh, certainly, and the best teachers are the teachers that can learn something from the students, even if it's something that's, you know, teenager-ish and a little different than what they're something they don't know about. We're going to wrap it up there. We've got about a minute left to go.
Sure.
Finish us up with a good thought about education.
I would like to quote Winston Churchill, whose quotes I absolutely adore. And I always say that to my children: never, never, never give up. Because even if on the first try you do not succeed in a matter, you might not try in the second time either. On the third time, you will most likely succeed because you have much more experience.
Certainly in gradients, you get closer every time.
Exactly.
And as long as you don't give up, then you're bound to get there eventually, or get closer to your goal eventually. I'm not sure we're finishing. We're trying to figure out here. Oh, we figured it out. There's the closing music. I hear it. This has been Progressive Soup. I'm David Stevenson, Nina Mohadjer, and having another great conversation about the world around us.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Nina. Enjoy your evening.